So we know how to use it to enhance who we already are, what we already do.
Malcolm-Jamal Warner drowned while vacationing in Costa Rica. He was just 54 years old.
Some deaths feel distant, abstract, like headlines that don't quite reach the heart. But some feel personal, some feel like someone quietly important just vanished. That's how it felt when news broke. Malcolm-Jamal Warner has died. He wasn't the kind of celebrity who made noise just to stay relevant. He didn't build a career off controversy or chaos. He was never the guy in tabloid headlines or viral scandals. Malcolm-Jamal Warner was something much rarer, a grounded voice in a loud world. Someone who never seemed to chase the spotlight, but somehow made it feel warmer when it found him. And now he's gone. On July 20th, 2025.
I'm rocking it. What? It's a beautiful day here in Atlanta. I just wanted to shout out and just spread some.
While vacationing with his family in Costa Rica, Warner drowned in the ocean off the coast of Playa Grande. It was sudden, it was brutal, it didn't seem real. The headlines said it was a tragic accident, caught in a rip current, pulled from the surf, no vital signs. But for those who grew up watching him, listening to him, and quietly respecting the way he moved through the world, this wasn't just a freak accident, it was a gut punch. Because this wasn't supposed to be how his story ended. For most people, Warner will always be remembered as Theo Huxtable, the funny, lovable teenage son on The Cosby Show. But those who looked closer saw a much deeper story. A story of a boy who grew up under the spotlight and managed not to lose himself in it.
No one realized that Malcolm-Jamal Warner's drowning death stemmed from an act of kindness, and his family still cannot accept it.
A story of an artist who traded celebrity for authenticity. A story of a Black man who spent his adulthood telling his truth, even when it was uncomfortable, even when nobody else was. And in the final days before his death, Warner was doing exactly that. In what now feels like a haunting coincidence, he had just released an episode of his podcast, Not All Hood. In it, he spoke about cultural erasure, about legacy, about what it really means to survive in a system that was never built for you. The words were personal, they were sharp, and now they sound like something else entirely. A warning, a farewell.
Circumstances of Malcolm-Jamal Warner's unexpected death and how it left Jaleel completely shattered. The world.
A final reflection from a man who seemed to sense the clock was winding down. There was no scandal, no outburst, no tabloid drama, just a man, a message, and then silence. And that's what makes this harder to process. So Warner was the kind of figure who gave you faith that stability could exist in the spotlight. He had lived through fame, disappointment, loss, and reinvention. And yet, he still showed up with intention, humility, and purpose. So when he vanished, just like that, people weren't just sad. They were disoriented. How does a voice so steady go silent so suddenly? How does a man who just spoke the truth about survival not survive?
I think the turning point for Theo was when they diagnosed him with dyslexia. And that was that.
In the next few minutes, we're going to walk through what really happened. No speculation, no conspiracy, just the facts. We'll break down the events on the beach that day, what's been confirmed by authorities, and what the early confusion got wrong. And we'll take a closer look at Warner's legacy, not the headlines, but the real story. The choices he made, the impact he left, and the quiet power of a life lived with integrity. Because Malcolm-Jamal Warner didn't just play a role. He became something bigger, a reminder that it's possible to move through this world with grace, even when no one's watching. And now that he's gone, it's time we finally pay attention. July 20th, 2025.
Hollywood is reeling, but no one is hurting more than Lisa Bonet. After years of silence and unanswered questions.
Playa Grande, also known as Playa Cocos, on the eastern Caribbean coast of Costa Rica. Malcolm-Jamal Warner was vacationing with his family, far from the spotlight, far from industry demands. It was supposed to be a break, a chance to rest, recharge, be present. The beach that day was quiet, the kind of place where time slows down, the kind of place where no one expects tragedy to arrive. But the ocean that afternoon wasn't calm. Playa Grande is known by locals for something deadly beneath its beauty: rip currents. Fast-moving, invisible rivers of water that pull swimmers out toward deep sea with no warning and no mercy. According to official reports from Costa Rica's Judicial Investigation Agency.
Okay, I'm going to say the quiet part out loud. First of all, condolences to Malcolm-Jamal.
OIJ. Warner entered the water with another adult male. Witnesses say everything appeared normal at first, but then the current shifted. Powerful and unpredictable. In seconds, both men were in trouble. A woman nearby heard the shouting. She wasn't just a tourist, she was a doctor. Without hesitation, she and another beachgoer raced into the water. They pulled Warner's companion to safety. But Warner was already unresponsive. Once back on shore, CPR was performed immediately. First by the doctor and others on the beach, then by the Costa Rican Red Cross, who arrived quickly after receiving an emergency call. But despite every effort, Warner showed no signs of life. He was pronounced dead at the scene.
Actor Malcolm-Jamal Warner has sadly passed away at the age of 54. TMZ is just broke.
The official autopsy confirmed what many feared: asphyxia by submersion. The medical term for drowning. There were no external injuries, no evidence of foul play, no drugs, no alcohol, just a powerful ocean and a man taken far too soon. And it all happened in minutes. What makes this loss even more painful is the setting. Playa Grande is beautiful but deadly. And on that day, there were no lifeguards on duty. A tragic detail, but not an unusual one. Due to limited funding and staffing, many of Costa Rica's beaches, especially on the Caribbean side, do not have full-time lifeguard coverage even during peak tourist seasons.
Yeah, these hurt. Yesterday we learned of the passing of Malcolm-Jamal Warner. Warner had several film and television.
Local authorities later confirmed that warning signs were posted in both English and Spanish about the dangerous currents. But for many visitors, those signs can go unnoticed. Overshadowed by blue skies, warm sand, and the illusion of peace. And in Warner's case, it cost him his life. This was not recklessness, this wasn't carelessness. This was a natural force, unseen, unrelenting, and impossible to escape once you're caught in it. His family was there, his daughter was nearby. A moment that should have been part of a peaceful memory became a nightmare. And for millions of fans hearing the news that day, the story felt almost too surreal to believe.
We were very clear we were having a girl. And I knew that I needed a girl first to kind of ease me into it because
How could a man who had survived the machine of Hollywood, who had risen above its traps and managed to live a life of calm and control, suddenly vanish in a place designed for rest? But that wasn't the only confusion surrounding his final moments. Because in the hours that followed the breaking news, another story started to spread. One that wasn't quite true. As the news of Malcolm-Jamal Warner's death broke across social media, the story began to shift. Not because of facts, but because of fear, confusion, and the internet's need for immediacy. In the hours that followed the first reports, a different version of the story began to circulate. One that claimed Warner had died while saving his daughter.
Y'all, I have some incredibly tragic and breaking news for you guys right now. Malcolm-Jamal Warner, who is best known for his role as
that he jumped into the water to rescue her from the rip current, that he sacrificed his life for hers. It was heartbreaking, it was cinematic, and it was wrong. That version of the story spread quickly, reposted by fan pages, speculation accounts, and even a few smaller news outlets. But within 24 hours, Costa Rican authorities issued a formal correction. Warner's daughter, who was 8 years old, was never in the water. She was safe, on shore the entire time, surrounded by family members and other adults. According to the official timeline released by the Judicial Investigation Agency, OIJ, Warner had entered the ocean with a male family friend.
This right here is why I got thalassophobia right now. Drowning has to be one of the worst causes of death ever.
That friend was also pulled into the current but was successfully rescued. Warner, tragically, was not. The authorities made it clear this was not a rescue attempt. This was a man caught in a powerful natural force, not a dramatic save gone wrong. And while the viral story painted him as a hero, the truth didn't need embellishment. Warner didn't have to die saving someone to be noble. He already lived that way. Still, the rumor lingered. It made its way into YouTube videos, comment sections, and emotional tributes. But repeating it, even with good intentions, meant distorting what really happened. It also shifted the focus away from the real dangers of that beach.
When I was 15, I think, I was in the hospital with my grandfather.
The lack of lifeguards, the underestimated power of rip currents, and how quickly a peaceful day can turn fatal. The truth is already heavy enough. He was a father on vacation with his family, enjoying a moment of rest when the ocean pulled him under. And for his family, especially his daughter, living through that day was already traumatic enough. They don't need myths, they need space to grieve, truthfully. By setting the record straight, we honor the man as he really was, not as a fictional version of him built for clickbait or drama. Because in reality, Warner didn't need a headline-grabbing narrative to be remembered as a protector. He lived that role every day, in his work, in his presence, in his choices.
Shockwaves are ripping through Hollywood tonight. Malcolm-Jamal Warner, best known as Theo Huxtable from The Cosby Show.
And now in his memory. But as more facts became clear, so did something else, something harder to accept. This tragedy might have been preventable. Not because of what Warner did or didn't do, but because of what was missing that day on the beach. The beach where Malcolm-Jamal Warner lost his life wasn't some secret, hidden stretch of shoreline. Playa Grande, also known as Playa Cocos, is one of Costa Rica's better-known beaches, especially along the Caribbean coast. It's beautiful, it's peaceful, and it's dangerous. Locals know the truth. Beneath its calm surface, Playa Grande hides one of the deadliest natural threats in coastal waters.
We have history together because you played my cheating ex-husband on the sitcom Sherry. You remember that?
We had a blast.
Rip currents. These fast, narrow channels of water can pull even strong swimmers away from shore within seconds. They don't crash like waves. They don't roar. They slip beneath the surface, silent but merciless. And on July 20th, 2025, that current claimed a life. But what made this moment even more tragic wasn't just the power of the ocean. It was what wasn't there to stop it. There were no lifeguards on duty that day, not one. According to officials from the Caribbean Guard, a local safety authority tasked with coastal monitoring, Playa Grande has long struggled with lifeguard staffing. Despite the high foot traffic and known risk of currents,
the article goes on to say that Warner had drowned off the Costa Rica on Sunday. So this actually occurred on Sunday. They stated that the Costa Rica...
The beach has been chronically underfunded. Most of the year, it's unguarded. Warning signs were posted in both English and Spanish, advising visitors of the strong current. But signs don't save lives. Not when the ocean looks calm, not when you're with family, not when you think, just for a moment, it's safe enough to wade in. And that's the heartbreak of it all. This wasn't reckless behavior. Warner wasn't cliff diving. He wasn't doing something dangerous for attention. He was simply in the water, like millions of people are on vacation, on a beach that looked like paradise, but came with no protection. In the aftermath of his death, the Caribbean Guard issued a public statement.
This to ABC News. Now, the coroners in Costa Rica had also labeled his death by asphyxia. But the article goes on to state,
urging government officials to increase funding for water safety, pointing out that Warner's drowning was not the first in that area. But sadly, it often takes a celebrity tragedy for these warnings to be heard. Locals have long asked for change, more lifeguards, better signage, public education on rip currents. But funding is limited and enforcement is inconsistent. Warner's death now becomes part of that story. A symbol of what happens when nature collides with human neglect. It's haunting to think about. If a single trained lifeguard had been on that beach that day, just one, this story might have ended differently.
It's out here lifing, right? For me and for everybody else. But just wanted to remind you as I remind myself.
A rescue might have been possible. A life might have been saved. Instead, the burden fell to vacationers. A doctor who happened to be nearby, a bystander who ran into the waves without hesitation. They did everything they could, but they were never supposed to be the front line. And so now we're left with another tragic layer. Warner's death wasn't just a loss. It was a warning, a sign that even paradise has dangers, and that awareness, training, and infrastructure are not optional. But while the environmental facts help explain how he died, they don't explain the weight of what we lost. Because Warner wasn't just a victim of nature. He was a man with decades of artistic purpose.
This is where the Cosby Show star Malcolm-Jamal Warner's life suddenly and shockingly ended over the weekend. You can see right now, there's a red flag.
Still working, still speaking, still evolving. And that's what makes what came next even harder to process. The autopsy confirmed it. The case was closed. But for those who admired him, the heartbreak was just beginning. After the headlines, the rumors, and the early confusion, the official word finally arrived. The Judicial Investigation Agency of Costa Rica, OIJ, released their report. Malcolm-Jamal Warner died from asphyxia by submersion, the clinical term for drowning. The autopsy found no signs of trauma, no drugs, no alcohol, and no foul play. There were no suspicious circumstances, no indication of an underlying health event, just the ocean, a powerful, invisible current, and a man caught in it.
Bro. What? The actor Malcolm-Jamal Warner has died. First of all, rest in peace to him.
Warner had not been engaged in any dangerous activity. He wasn't cliff diving, partying, or pushing limits. He wasn't alone. He was simply swimming, just like thousands of people do on vacation every day. His body was discovered quickly. CPR was administered by trained responders. But the current was faster, and the tragedy irreversible. The finality of that confirmation gave many fans their answer, but it also made the loss more devastating, because it stripped away any remaining hope that maybe something could have been done. That maybe somehow it wasn't real, but it was real, and it was final. The case was ruled an accidental drowning, and the investigation was closed.
Did you notice the extra red flags on the beach after Malcolm-Jamal Warner's death? 3 signs suggest his death might not have been an accident.
And yet, the sense of disbelief lingered. How could someone who had survived child stardom, who had avoided the spotlight's traps, who had grown into a steady, mature voice in Black culture and art, just disappear like this? Maybe it was the sheer ordinariness of it. The idea that someone so composed, so private, so thoughtful could be lost in a moment that felt so random, so unfair. Not because of scandal, not because of conflict, but because he went into the water and didn't come back out. And somehow that made it harder. Because Warner's entire life was built on survival.
Shockwaves are ripping through Hollywood tonight. Malcolm-Jamal Warner, best known as Theo Huxtable from The Cosby Show.
He had survived the machine of Hollywood. He had survived the collapse of The Cosby Show's legacy. He had survived personal heartbreak, public pressure, and the quiet invisibility that comes with maturity in a youth-obsessed industry. And now he was gone. Not to controversy, not to consequence, but to nature. It's a strange kind of grief, the kind that comes with no one to blame, no what if, no conspiracy, just absence. And for the people who loved him, both personally and from afar, what was left wasn't just sadness, it was reflection. Because if Malcolm-Jamal Warner's final days weren't marked by noise, then maybe his legacy doesn't have to be either.
Warner couldn't believe he was gone and insisted on an autopsy. What no one knew was that Warner was trying to help another tourist.
Maybe it can be marked by something else: integrity, creativity, grace. And as we start to reflect on what he left behind, the music, the words, the performances, and the podcast, that gave so many people space to feel seen, we also begin to see the deeper truth. That Warner's voice may have been silenced, but his message wasn't finished. For many, Malcolm-Jamal Warner was, and always will be, Theo Huxtable, the lovable, sometimes clueless, big-hearted son on The Cosby Show. A symbol of Black youth in the 1980s who was allowed to grow, make mistakes, and be guided by love, not violence or stereotypes.
Sitcom The Breaking News actor Malcolm-Jamal Warner, widely known for starring in the hit TV sitcom The Cosby Show.
But Warner didn't just play a character, he became a presence, a part of America's collective memory. Week after week, millions of viewers welcomed him into their homes. And for an entire generation of Black families, Theo Huxtable wasn't just a role model, he was representation. And yet, Warner never let that role define him. When The Cosby Show ended, many expected him to fade quietly into the child star category, a face people remember, but a name they forget. But Warner had other plans. He directed episodes of shows like Kenan and Kel and The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, proving he had talent behind the camera too.
Role on The Cosby Show has died. People reports that the 54-year-old was in Costa Rica on a family vacation and accidentally...
He dove headfirst into spoken word poetry, releasing albums that reflected not just artistry, but lived experience, pain, and social commentary. And in 2015, he won a Grammy for Best Traditional R&B Performance. Not for a cameo, not for nostalgia, but for pure musical craft. He starred in shows like Malcolm and Eddie, The Resident, Suits, 911, and The People vs. O.J. Simpson, showing range, maturity, and depth far beyond his childhood image. Each role was a quiet evolution, no need for reinvention, just growth, quiet, consistent, deliberate. And then came something even more personal, his podcast, Not All Hood.
He went swimming, and during that time, he drowned. In his passing, he is leaving behind a wife and daughter, but I want to talk a little bit.
This wasn't celebrity gossip, it wasn't celebrity fluff. It was a space for reflection, for cultural honesty. Warner talked about being Black in Hollywood, about media narratives, about language, survival, and healing. His tone wasn't angry, but it was firm. Director, unfiltered. In one of his final episodes, he challenged the very name of his own show. A spoken word artist told him, "Ain't nothing wrong with the hood." And Warner paused, took that in. He realized that even with good intentions, he might have been feeding into the same media framing he'd spent decades fighting against. That's who he was, someone always willing to re-examine, to evolve.
On July 20th, Malcolm-Jamal Warner drowned while swimming with his daughter at a beach in Costa Rica. He was caught up in a rip current. I'm Dr.
He later said that survival itself, especially as a Black man in America, was Black excellence. Not money, not fame, not a Grammy, but the simple act of still being here, of still speaking, still standing. And maybe that's what made his death hit so hard, and because Warner had found his voice. And he was finally using it with full freedom. Not as a character, not through a script, but as himself. His legacy isn't one of explosive headlines. It's one of quiet consistency, emotional intelligence, and a lifelong refusal to be reduced to a stereotype. He could have coasted on Theo, but instead he built something richer, realer. He became the kind of artist who didn't just perform, he made you think.
Garcia came in and said, "Did you hear?" And I was like, "Hear what?" And sadly to report, TMZ is reporting Malcolm...
And as fans began revisiting his work in the wake of his passing, a deeper pattern emerged. That Warner didn't just grow up in the spotlight, he outgrew it. And in doing so, he left behind something far more valuable than fame. He left behind a blueprint for how to move through the industry with dignity, for how to evolve beyond what the world expects, and for how to speak the truth even when no one's asking you to. In a world where child stars so often spiral into addiction, scandal, or obscurity, Malcolm-Jamal Warner never did. He didn't burn out, he didn't disappear, he didn't become a cautionary tale. Instead, he chose something harder, something quieter.
Oh, wow. What a way to start a Monday, just hearing that Malcolm-Jamal Warner has passed away, died from...
He chose to grow up on his own terms and far from the chaos. From the day The Cosby Show ended, Warner knew what he was up against. He once admitted that being called Theo in public used to bother him, not out of shame, but out of a desire to be seen as more. He didn't want to be frozen in time, permanently stuck in the shadow of a teenage version of himself. And so he made a conscious choice to evolve creatively, emotionally, and spiritually. He avoided the party circuits. He stayed off the tabloid radar. He chose work that mattered to him, even if it wasn't flashy or headline-worthy.
Police in Costa Rica say the Cosby Show star was swimming with his 8-year-old daughter at a beach on Sunday.
When peers were crashing out or clinging to the past, Warner was writing books, directing TV, exploring jazz and spoken word, and building a body of work that told a different story. One about staying the course, one about depth over drama. Much of that discipline he credited to his mother, Pamela Warner, his manager and guiding hand throughout his youth. She taught him structure, self-respect, and how to navigate an industry that often devours young talent and spits out broken adults. But beyond career choices, Warner's integrity showed most clearly in how he responded to loss and loyalty.
Malcolm-Jamal Warner, one of the good dudes in Hollywood, and I'm telling you, fam, it's hard to find some.
In 1998, he lost his former girlfriend in Cosby Show, co-star Michelle Thomas, to cancer. Though they had broken up years before, Warner was reportedly by her side when she passed. He never used that tragedy to generate attention. He never made it a media moment. He grieved privately, gracefully, silently. That was who he was. Years later, when the Bill Cosby scandal exploded, Warner found himself pulled back into the spotlight, not because of what he did, but because of who he had once stood beside. He didn't defend the indefensible, but he didn't throw anyone under the bus either. His response was honest, conflicted, and human. "I can't defend him," he said, "but I won't deny what the show meant to people."
Mike Geist helps run a volunteer lifeguard organization here. He says while no lifeguards were on duty that day, Geist's friend who
He called the media response a circus. And he mourned the loss of the show's cultural value. Not because it hurt his paycheck, but because it erased something that had inspired millions. That kind of nuance is rare, especially in an era where most public figures pick a side, posture, and perform outrage. But Warner didn't do performance. He did reflection. And it showed in the career he built. Not one of superstardom, but of substance. While other actors chased relevance, Warner quietly stacked credits across film, television, and music. He challenged himself, reinvented himself, and kept building without ever needing the approval of the industry's loudest voices.
In part to you all. Because our lives move so quickly and we can disappear at any second.
In fact, his most powerful work came later in life, when he stopped chasing roles and started speaking with his own. His podcast, his poetry, his refusal to simplify Blackness into a marketing tool. It all came from a place of lived experience and deep thought, not branding. That's what made Malcolm-Jamal Warner rare. Not just as an actor, but as a man. He chose privacy over performativity, intention over attention. He lived with clarity in a culture addicted to chaos. And that's why his passing feels so heavy. Because we didn't just lose a talent, we lost a template, an example of how it's possible to survive the spotlight and still keep your soul.
Cosby, including Malcolm-Jamal Warner. I'm going to pause since this is
A life of integrity is never the loudest. But when it ends, the silence it leaves behind is deafening. Malcolm-Jamal Warner didn't need to shout to be heard. He didn't need to trend to matter. He was a quiet force in a world obsessed with noise, and that's exactly what made him unforgettable. In a culture that rewards drama, he chose dignity. In an industry that thrives on reinvention, he chose growth. And in a media landscape where everything is curated, filtered, and performed, Malcolm simply spoke truthfully, thoughtfully, and without apology. His death was sudden, his passing was tragic, but his life was a masterclass in how to exist with purpose.
We would take walks together, all of us, and pick up food, talk.
He didn't leave behind scandal, he left behind standards. He didn't spend his final years trying to relive past glory. He spent them building something new, creating, reflecting, elevating, and in doing so, he gave people space. Space to feel seen, space to question what they've been told, space to imagine something better. His podcast wasn't just entertainment, it was invitation. An invitation to wrestle with identity, culture, pain, and pride. He wasn't trying to go viral. He was trying to speak clearly, to remind people that survival is a kind of excellence all on its own. That's why this hurts. Not just because we lost someone.
It's been a minute. Peace and love, and I'll be back soon.
But because we lost someone who understood, who paid attention, who was still becoming something even greater when the world suddenly fell silent. There won't be primetime specials, there may not be statues. But for the people who really knew what he stood for, there's something more lasting. A blueprint for integrity, a legacy of stillness, a reminder that not all impact needs to be loud. Warner's message didn't end with his death. In fact, it may have just begun. Because now we're listening, not to the role he played, but to the man he became. And in that, Malcolm-Jamal Warner will never be forgotten.